All right, let's go ahead and get started. Okay. All right, so today is going to be all about the introduction. 95 to 100% of this should be review if you took 203 last semester, or 203 at all, really. We're just going to be learning more about the introduction and what goes into it. If you haven't already, go ahead and open/download and open the in-class activity called Integrating Research. It can be found in Assignment 7 folder. We'll get to that in a couple slides, but we're going to be working with that twice today, so make sure you have that. All right, so today's agenda is going to be, like I said, all about the introduction. We're going to go over, what goes into it, how to incorporate your literature review materials or articles that you found into your introduction, and then talk about assignment number 7, which is the introduction draft, which is due next Thursday. If we have time, we'll do a writing workshop or part 2 of the writing workshop like we did. I think it was the first week. It might have been the first or second week. However, my last class, we didn't have enough time for that, so I rushed through that. Yeah, so that's basically today's overview. This is due tomorrow. I believe it's at midnight, but let's just get it done as soon as possible. The midterm peer evaluations, the link can be found on eCampus, but this is where you can let me know, how the group members are performing in your group. If people aren't pulling their weight, let us know there so their grade can be affected by what you say. Does anyone have any questions so far about the structure of today or the midterm peer evaluations or any problems with submitting assignment number 6? Or 5, whatever you just, I think it was 6, whatever you just submitted with the Qualtrics survey. All right, not seeing anything. Let's move on. So this picture should be very familiar, especially if you took 2 or 3 last semester. It's the exact same slide. Overview of the introduction. So what is the focus of the introduction? Well, you're going to be introducing the problem under investigation, and it kind of puts the problem or your research idea in context, and it explains why what you're doing is important. Because if what you're doing is not important, then why do a study, all right? That's kind of what the introduction sets up. It kind of sets up your argument. This global organization of the introduction is you start off with this big picture issue, and then you eventually narrow your way down to be more specific. And so finally you end up with your final paragraph of the introduction being all about your experiment. I'm going to use my research as an example, but I do a lot of stuff with social media and well-being, let's just say depression as my outcome. I typically start off my papers by saying something along the lines of, hey, depression's really bad. Obviously a lot more scientific than that, but, I maybe have some rates about depression. And if I'm writing about adolescence, I'll talk about, depression skyrockets in adolescence. That's a pretty catchy, first sentence, right? Rates of depression, something along the lines of rates of depression skyrocket during adolescence and list off some rates. And then maybe I'll, in the same paragraph, in that intro paragraph, I'll talk about, looking at social media, right? Everyone uses social media. I'll talk about rates of social media use. And so I kind of, you start off with this really catchy, we'll get to that in the next couple of slides, but you start off with this really catchy hook in the very beginning, and you talk very broadly, depression, social media, and then you narrow, your lit review. You start bringing up research that's more specific to your own study, and finally you end it talking about your own experiment. So what are the 3 basic parts of the introduction? Well, first you introduce the problem, right? You develop the background, which is what we're going to primarily focus on today, and then you provide an overview of your current study, kind of what we've been saying for the past slide or 2. So, introducing the problem. This is where you're going to talk about, what is your research question and what is the big picture of your investigation and how does your research fit into it? Your main goals here are to get your readers interested in the topic and provide context for the remainder of the intro. So here's just this general structure for this first paragraph. Remember back to 2 or 3 when you were writing your correlational paper, you wanted your first paragraph to be something that has a really catchy first sentence to grab your reader's attention. This is where I just mentioned where I'll write about depression. Or maybe, depending on the point of the article I'm writing, I might also talk about rates of social media use because, those are really large. So, this is just, while this might vary for some people, I suggest sticking with this general structure for your first paragraph. You want to open with an attention-grabbing sentence about the big picture topic. This might be, thinking about your own research. When I'm going to try and bring up people's research ideas. Think about the big picture. So if you're writing about age and job hiring, right? Or to see if the age of the applicant influences their, how likely you are to hire someone. You don't want to be, you want to kind of talk about age discrimination in the workplace. Think about how your research idea fits into this bigger picture. Don't think specific. So start off with an attention-grabbing sentence about the big picture topic. Summarize the previous critical findings. So this is, my own research. I'll bring up rates of depression, rates of social media use. I really shouldn't be talking, or we shouldn't be seeing any of the research you found, like any specific results, right? You don't want to bring up, well, prior research has shown, exactly what you're looking at, right? It's too specific, and that can come later in the lit review. Next, you should transition to what's unknown, which is your topic. And then finally, you should clearly state your topic and convey its importance. So let's go ahead and give it a try. So on your own, just for the next 5 to 6 minutes, I want you to work on using this structure, writing the first paragraph for your paper, for your intro. I would suggest really just working with bullet points right now. So try to hit all of, 1, 2, 3, 4, try to hit it in 4 bullet points. If you want to write sentences to go along with it, that's perfectly fine. But just if at the minimum, just jot down some bullet points that you can answer these, 4 sentence topics, I guess, if you want to call them. So go ahead and do that 5, 6 minutes. I'll ask for volunteers to let me know what they come up with afterwards. All right, does someone want to share what they came up with? At least share the first sentence or first bullet point, or at the very least, can you tell me what your big picture topic is?
My first sentence, I said, it is well known that color elicits a mood association.
Okay. So obviously you're doing colors and mood. Yeah, okay. So I think it gets you what your topic is, right? It gets directly at your topic, but is this a big picture topic? So you guys are doing, so your group is looking at how the color of a vignette influences mood, right? So think about how could your findings be used? So this might be good for advertisers, right? So maybe you could because it could be good for advertisers or maybe even colleges, right? Colleges could use this information. If you find that the color blue, and I have your group right, Nolan, right? The colors and mood and
yeah,
the vignettes. So perhaps you could show that your results. Now this is obviously isn't a sentence you could use for your first attention grabbing sentence, but you could work it into something. Colleges may be able to use your information because if you find that the color blue actually does make people happier and more calm, it might be beneficial to have the instructions of tests in blue, right? Instead of instead of red, but maybe instead of black like they normally are. So maybe an attention grabbing sentence could be something along the lines of Potentially color could have many, or it could have an influential impact throughout colleges, and I don't know, anything else where mood might influence decision making. So I like the sense that you have maybe for some other places, because it really clearly states what you're looking at. But I would suggest having a more fancy sentence or not even fancy, more bigger, quote unquote, funner sentence in the beginning. Emma.
I just wanted to ask if our attention grabbing sentence, could it be a question? Like asking the reader something that relates to them?
It can be a question. I think it depends what the question. What are you thinking? Let me know. What are you thinking for your question?
Well, my group, we're doing aggression or stress and aggression and how it relates. So I was thinking, like, have you ever wondered why your mom tends to be passive aggressive or like seems to be in an off mood when she comes home from work? Like something like that. And then like answer it by saying like, well, research shows that stress tends to have an effect on aggression and all that stuff.
Yeah, that works because you're incorporating, you have this question. I wouldn't maybe not make it specific to like moms. You got to remember that your audience is, so just think about your audience as the general person. I mean, you could keep that question works. If you could make it even more broader, maybe significant other or family member or anyone that but yeah, I like that because then you followed up with a previous critical finding, right? Prior research has shown that stress is related to aggression, and then you transition maybe what's in the unknown, maybe your manipulative or experimental side of things, and then you follow up with yours. I do like that. That was a good one. Thank you, Emma.
Thank you.
Can someone from group 5 tell me what their big picture is? You don't have to share your intro sentence if you don't want to, but just your big picture topic. In case you don't remember what group you are, this is the one where you're looking at the ethnicity of the couple and the housing price.
For mine, I put racial discrimination is extremely prevalent in the United States, and it shows itself in a lot of ways, especially socially, but also in other aspects of life, like finances and employment, just like super general.
Sure, yeah. So I highly suggest that your big picture topic, yeah, that was a good sentence. Your big picture topic for this group, would be racial discrimination, right? There's a lot, you can do a lot of attention grabbing sentences with racial discrimination. Yeah, good job. So yeah, so you see it's a little bit difficult to write, these intro paragraphs, or really the introduction in general can be a little difficult to write, but it is possible. All right, let's move on. Good job, everyone. All right, so we're moving away from the intro paragraph and we are jumping into the meat and bones of the introduction, which is developing the background. So the goal of this section is to outline all the previous, well, not all, but a lot of previous research on your topic and related topics. And this and related topics is really important because you're not going to, you're not going to find, you might have a hard time finding research that is specifically on your topic. And especially like maybe psychological articles on research on your topic. But I'm going to pick on group 5 because they're looking at how ethnicity of a couple, they're trying to sell their house and how the ethnicity will impact the housing price or what people are praised the house to be. Well, you should be looking at research that looks at just racial discrimination in general. Because while your study is specifically focused on housing prices, your main theory, right, is about racial discrimination and how people discriminate by race and how that influences a bunch of different outcomes. So I should be seeing a lot of research on just racial discrimination in general, not necessarily your outcome of housing prices, but just racial discrimination. Another group is doing like social media and stress. These related topics, you should, seeing how social media influences other things other than stress, right? There only may be, let's say there's 100 social media studies out there ever, only 3 or 4 of them might be about stress, but you have a bunch that look at other outcomes that are kind of similar to stress, like other mental health things like depression, anxiety, self-esteem. So you should be having a lot of research that, is on your topic, but also related topics. Here's another group, attractiveness and perceived intelligence. You should be having research that looks at discrimination based on attraction, not necessarily on IQ and intelligence as your outcome, but just anything, any type of discrimination based on perceived looks. Another group, I'm trying to go through some of the groups. I'm going to try to bring up all the groups' topics so I can give hints to every group. A group is doing emotion, and their outcome is willingness to donate. You should be looking at research that shows how emotion influences any type of decision making, because willingness to donate is a decision, right, that someone makes. So, you might have a little bit of research that looks at specifically willingness to donate, but you can also see how emotion or different emotional states like happy and sad influences other decisions. Talk about colors and mood. Colors and mood, there's like a whole psychology field around colors and mood, so that shouldn't be too hard. And then stress and aggression. You should be looking at how stress influences other emotions, because your outcome is aggression, but look at other emotions that stress can influence. There's a whole field of research about how stress can cause, different reactions in people. So while yes, you should have, hopefully have some research that looks at your specific independent variable and your specific dependent variable, it is perfectly fine and a necessity that you look at other research that talks about your topic. So let me get off that little soapbox, but so you need to tell the story, and the story is in quotes, because remember, we're doing academic writing. We're not using flowery language and talking about, well, maybe this and maybe that. No, we're talking, specific study results. Anyways, we need to tell the story of why we're doing the study. Really, you need to set up kind of an argument of saying, hey, at the end of your intro, right, you're saying, here's our research study. And the meat and bones is kind of all this research to support why you're doing your study. You can also, you need to talk about how does your research fit in the bigger picture of knowledge on the topic? How does your research study complement previous research? Also ask yourself, why am I doing this study? So she has this example here, and I'm not sure if Dr. Tenenholtz used this fidget spinner example in like another class. But let's say we're doing a study using a fidget spinner, right? And we're seeing how if a fidget spinner can distract someone from a mental task. So let's just say if it influences memory recall in some test. So, why are you doing this study? Because fidget spinners might be distracting, right? And how are they distracting? They impair attention. So your literature review needs to focus on research that has examined attention and memory, right? Because if you're doing a study using fidget spinners, you're probably not going to find much research that has used fidget spinners as a distraction. So you need to take a step back, and I advise you, we've kind of already done it, but I advise you, look at the bigger picture. What is the bigger picture in this fidget spinner study? Well, we're seeing if distractions to attention can influence recall. So you should be looking at studies that look at attention and memory, or attention and memory recall. Additionally, and this also is we're going to get to it in limitations, but this can be something to talk about limitations. But remember that your study is going to be experimental. So you're going to want to try to cite and find and cite other studies that are experimental, if it's possible. That might not be possible for all of your topics. I don't know some of the literature on some of these, so it may or may not be possible. I assume it's possible, but that's up to you. You'll know more because you've done the lit review. But if you can't find any, right, that's a limitation, and that's something you can address and saying, hey, there's next to no experimental research done on our topic. We're an experimental study. We're addressing these prior limitations. But we'll get to that into a little bit more when we talk about limitations. So different papers are going to need different organizations for their introduction, the meat and bones, when they develop the background. However, there's some key things that you're going to be sure to include, or you need to be sure that you include. You're going to want summaries of key findings related to your topic, obviously. So this is where you're going to talk about prior research. But an important thing here is you need to integrate research. Don't just list previous findings. So what I don't want to see is, I don't want to see, well, I don't want to see a couple things. First off, a paragraph that is all about one study, right? Where all you do is talk about one study and you break down the study, what they found, how they did it, blah, 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 blah. And then you have another paragraph where you look at another study, and then another paragraph where you look at another study. No. One paragraph should have multiple studies in it where you have some common theme and you are writing about that theme. So, I'm going to go back and look at my own research. So social media and outcomes and well-being, any outcome. I'll typically, in my introduction, I'll typically have a paragraph on some mechanism linking social media and well-being. So typically, social comparison, right? People comparing themselves to others while utilizing social media. That's related to a whole bunch of negative outcomes. So I have a bunch of research, that would say social media, or social comparison is bad. And here's 5 studies. I'm going to integrate all these studies together to talk about why comparing yourself to others on social media is bad. Then I'll maybe have another paragraph that talks about social companionship, and social companionship, or increasing connectedness online, is actually related to a bunch of positive things. So if people are engaging in that, in being connected to others, that leads to positive outcomes. So I'll have another paragraph like that. So right there's clear 2 different paragraphs. I'm not just listing off research and saying they found this, they found this. It all is in a cohesive paragraph about one common theme. You need to think about why you're including each study. If you're, we're going to have an in-class assignment up next that kind of hints at this. But remember, each paragraph needs to have a reason why it's in it, and it should have a common theme, and this common theme should have a bunch of studies to support it. Something else you should write about are limitations of the previous findings, gaps in knowledge that your study fills in. So while studies have a lot of limitations, and remember, you can find these limitations in the discussion section of the article. So if it's a psychological empirical article, 99.9% of them will have limitations at the very end. There's a section for limitations in discussion, typically like a paragraph or 2 before the very, very end. So you go there and see if your study addresses any of these limitations. And I think this is the biggest one. This final point is the biggest one that you really should structure your meat and bones of this developing the background, is guiding theory. Why do you expect that there should be differences in your 2 conditions of your IV? Why do you think your IV will affect your dependent variable, right? If you don't think it will affect your dependent variable, why are you doing the study, right? There's no reason to do it. So, think about why, or reasons why your IV influences your DV, and maybe, build your paragraphs around that. Like in my research, like I said, social comparison and social connectedness, 2 different theories, I guess. Well, they are theories, 2 different theories for why my IV influences my DV. This is up to you, to come up with these or supporting topics for these key points. It's a little bit difficult, I understand, but if you stop and think and you look at the research that you found, you should see some common themes pop up. Does anyone have any questions so far about developing the background? All right, so this is what I just brought up, looking for themes in the articles that you read. So this just contains some ideas that might be important. You don't necessarily need to address all these points. These are just starting points to think about the literature that you've been reading. So, some things to think about when you're reading your articles. What is the consensus from prior studies? What do we know at this point? Do all these studies point to some general finding that's the same, right? This independent variable impacts this dependent variable in the same way every single time. So do they find the same basic result, even though they're using different methods? Some may use correlational studies. Some may use experimental studies. Some may use longitudinal studies. Yeah. So are there similar findings in different populations? So, adolescents versus emerging adults, or, young adults versus older adults. Perhaps there's an argument in the literature where different researchers take different sides. So, maybe some articles say this, other articles say, this, and that's something you can address in your own research. I'm going to bring up my own work again within social media. Some people say social media is bad. Some people say social media is good, and there's findings to support both of them. And so, when I'm developing studies like my dissertation, I'm answering some of these limitations in prior work. All right, so let's give it a try. So open up the integrating research exercise, which can be found in the assignment 7 folder. And what you're going to be doing is make sure you read over everything, read their research question, read, the articles. This should be very familiar because you did something exactly, you used this same exact sheet last semester. But what you need to do is choose at least 2 of the listed articles and then write a sentence or 2 that integrates the chosen articles, and that could be used in the intro of a paper on why students cheat. One of the things I'm going to suggest that you look at is, take a look at the 7 research articles that are posted here and find some common themes, right? There are, I was going to say there should be, there are common themes where you could classify 2 or 3 or maybe even 4 of the research articles together, and that could be 1 paragraph in your introduction. So go ahead, take a look at this assignment. First off, start combining some of these this literature into common themes, and then write an integrating sentence that kind of combines some of these articles. I'm going to go ahead and we'll come back at 3:06 and have people volunteer what they come up with. Okay, can someone tell me 3 things? First, what 2 or 3 or 4 articles they combined, why they combined them, so what theme, I guess, are they all revolving around, and if they have it, a potential sentence integrating all these, a sentence or 2 integrating all these research articles that they chose.
I can go ahead.
Sure.
So I picked the 3rd one and the 6th one, Signal and Keller. The reason I chose both of them is because they both talk about the reason to why people cheat. And so the sentence that I wrote that Single, 1982, and Keller, 1976, both reported that 68 to 69% of their participants believe that people cheat due to the pressure of getting a good grade. Another reason I chose it was because the percentages were pretty close together.
Sure, yeah. Yeah, that was a good job. So both of them are, found that just under 70% of participants think that people cheat to get a better grade. And that grade pressures lead to cheating. So yeah, that could be good. That's good 1 sentence. Anyone else? What other articles did they combine? At the very least, just tell me, we can start off. Just tell me what 2 articles you think, 2 or 3 articles should be combined. We'll start off with that.
I can go. I didn't finish writing the sentences to put them together, but I did the one with the 82% cheating rate, and then the one that's Davis, Grover, Becker, and McGregor, that's the 40 to 60 per percentage rate. And I was going to pick those two because the one talks about just in general, like the cheating rate. I mean, it doesn't specifically say where that 82% is coming from, but then the other one talks about how in larger institutions and how like the rate, percentage rate of that is. So I was going to like combine them and talk about it.
Sure. Yeah. So definitely those two could be combined. You could have an entire paragraph. So I think there's an easy paragraph set up here where you could talk about percentages of, or studies that report on percentage of cheating, right? And you could obviously definitely combine those two. I think you would want to flesh it out a little bit more. So if you have an entire paragraph on, here are the rates of cheating, right? Some people have relatively high rates of cheating, where we have an 82% we have an 82%, we have a 40 to 60%, right? That's relatively high. However, other studies have shown that cheating might not be as high. We have the Drake 1941 article that finds only a cheating percentage rate of 23%. So you can have an entire paragraph where you talk about percentage of cheating, and you have 3 articles that could go into it. Another paragraph where you could talk about different types of students. So look at, I believe it's number 1 and number 2. Yeah, the first two, they talk about type A and type B personalities, and they talk about classroom orientation. The second one does. So you can have an entire paragraph revolving around different types of students. And that could set up, okay, well, different types of students, some type of students may be more likely to cheat than others, right? Because that's kind of what we're setting up here. We're saying that probably type A and grade orientation people are going to be more likely to cheat, for various reasons. And then you could talk about those various reasons. And there's other, another paragraph could be why people cheat. So which one is it? Number 3 and number 7, or number 3, 6, and 7 talk about some potential reasons why people cheat, as reported by other people. Grade pressures, stress and pressure for good grades lead to cheating. So you can have an entire paragraph on why people cheat. So right there, we have like 3 or 4 paragraphs where just from these 7 articles about one sentence from each article, you have a bunch of paragraphs that you could write about. So I would suggest doing this with your own research, right? I would suggest looking at, finding some common themes. If you have to, do a 1 or 2 sentence summary of each article. This might be helpful for some people to do a 1 or 2 sentence summary of each article and see if you can find any common themes. All right, so something else that you should be doing in your introduction is addressing limitations. So like it says, even the best research has limitations. Every study has at least one limitation, most likely more. Like I said before, all these limitations can be found in the discussion. If it's in a psych article, it would be found in the discussion. Some things to look for: possible issues and how the independent variable or dependent variable are operationalized. Look at the population being studied. Is it who we want to know about? Are there any alternative explanations that could account for the results? Hold on, give me 1 second. So are there any alternative explanations that could potentially account for the results that researchers found? And maybe there's just gaps in knowledge. More research is needed. Maybe there's no experimental studies that you've looked at. They're all correlational. And so your study is an experiment and you're addressing that limitation. Like it says at the very bottom, focus primarily on issues that your study will address, right? So, don't bring up issues if you're not going to address them in your own research. All right, let's give it a try. I'm going to give you just like 2 or 3 more. I'm going to give you like 3 minutes. Take another look at this why students cheat assignment and see what limitations do you notice. So remember, we're designing a study here. It looks like we're designing a study looking at different types of personality and classroom orientation and why people cheat. So look at some of these articles. Tell me what limitations you see. I can think of like 2 or 3. So we'll come back at 3:16. Okay. Can someone tell me one limitation that they found?
All of the sources are just in the mid to late 90s. They're none recent.
Yeah, you mean like 1900s? Yeah. Yeah. So think about it. We're in 2021, and I think the latest article is in 1992. So yeah, research needs an update, right? Potentially reasons might change for why people cheat. Probably not. People want to get better grades. It's probably a main concern for people who cheat nowadays. Or maybe laziness. Who knows? But who knows? Because there's no research that looks at it in the 2020s. So good job. That's definitely one limitation. So there's another limitation, but we'll get to that. But let's think about what our research studies, the 7 here, actually show. So we have a bunch on the frequency with which students cheat, right? We have a bunch of, a couple, 3 or 4 that talk about rates of cheating. And it looks like 2 or 3 of them, yeah, 2 of them look at why people think other people cheat. So, they would I would do a poll right here. Why do people cheat? And you guys would tell me your answers and I would report on that. So what's a problem with that / what's a limitation with that? And think about their research question, but also think about what class we're in or what we're doing this semester. What is your project? Well, what type of project are you doing? So can someone tell me why this would be a limitation?
Maybe because people don't want to admit that they cheat.
Oh, okay, yeah, I see what you're saying. I guess I see. Let me ask it in a different way. Are these studies experimental or correlational?
Correlation.
Yeah, they're correlational. If I mean, some of these aren't even actual studies, right? Or like just finding a cheating rate of 82%. Like that's just, I don't know, some random report. It's not even a correlational study or an experimental at all. So yeah, so that's something that you could address. There's no experimental research. So that's a limitation, right? You're doing an experimental study, and look at their research question as well. So let me back up. One limitation is there's no experimental results that look at why people cheat and if different types of personalities / classroom orientations are related to cheating. And then look at their research questions. So they want to know what the relationship is between personality, classroom orientation, and cheating. None of these studies look at that, right? They kind of look at separate pieces of that. The first 2 just kind of define the IVs, I guess, the personalities and the classroom orientations. Number 3, and some of the other ones look at just rates of cheating. Some of them look at why people think other people cheat, but none of them really do look at these correlational or do an experimental design looking at personality, orientation, and cheating. So that's a limitation that these people would be able to talk about and address and say, hey, we're going to be doing an experimental study. So, make sure you look through your own research and see if you can come up with any limitations, or rather, you don't even have to come up with them, right? You can look at their own limitations. Or maybe, you don't have a lot of experimental studies in your research and there needs to be more experimental work done to really get at that to see if your IV influences your DV. So this should be another paragraph in your introduction, addressing limitations. And then like someone said, the studies are really old. Is this data still even relevant? We need a newer study. Good job. All right, take a minute or 2, look at this prompt and see if you can come up with, I believe there's at least 2 limitations here. All right, can someone give me one limitation that they found?
I think the fact that it's a self-report, even though it's anonymous, people still might not be completely honest about it.
Perfect. Yep, it's self-report, especially for this topic. Think about it. Stereotypically, guys have the social desirability, right? They have a incentive, a social incentive, if you want to call it, to inflate the number of, or to inflate their sexual activity, while girls have a social incentive to deflate it. So yeah, that's perfect. So, just self-report rates, might be off here. Can someone tell me another limitation? Let's think about response rate. Is there anything wrong with the response rate?
Only like 20% of the participants actually returned the survey.
Sure. And why would that be a problem?
There might be a reason why the other about 80% didn't return their survey.
Perfect. Yeah, there might be fundamental differences between those two groups of people. This is a problem that occurs in research all the time. There may be a reason why these participants participated. So let's think about, I'm just going to randomly pick one. I'm going to pick on group 5 again, where this group is looking at the ethnicity and how that influences housing prices. And so they're looking at racial discrimination. Perhaps people who are more likely to racially discriminate aren't as likely to participate in research, in psychological research studies, right? Maybe because they just don't care about science, or for some other reason. Doesn't really matter. For some other reason. So, you might be limited in who you're getting already. You want to, whenever we do psychological research, we really want to make sure our results reflect the general population. But a lot of the times for something like this, maybe these 20% that participated in this study that we're talking about on this PowerPoint, maybe this 20% is fundamentally different than the other 80% who didn't participate. So this is always a concern. All right, so here's a follow-up question. How would you address these two limitations? So we have response rate and we have this self-report issue. I should mention that there's not just one way to, these are two separate issues. How would you address either one of these issues?
For response rate, would we maybe want to try to pull a larger amount of people to get more responses?
Sure, you could do that. Pulling 1,000 people or distributing a survey to 1,000 people should get you a decent bit of, it got them 200, but maybe incentivize them, right? How do we incentivize psych students to participate in research studies throughout the university? We give them SONA credit, right? So you get extra credit throughout your classes. Yeah, so we could incentivize them some way, maybe pay them, offer them, put them in a raffle, extra credit opportunity. How about this is a harder one. Anyone have a potential fix, quote unquote fix, for the self-report issue?
You could make sure that there's no emotionally charged questions in there, try to go through and reword them, because that could be a reason why people aren't going through with it.
Maybe, yeah. Maybe make it more neutral questions. I think this one's hard because you're already saying it's anonymous, right? So maybe you have to really restate that, please be as truthful as possible. It's completely anonymous. Yeah, I don't know. This one's a hard one because whenever people are doing self-report surveys, you can always lie. It's always a problem and always a concern that researchers have. Are your participants actually telling the truth? Perhaps you could even put this doesn't get at the social desirability issue, but perhaps you could put some validity check questions in because, maybe people who aren't taking it serious, let's say a guy who wants to inflate his numbers, what is the question they're asking? Whether their total number of partners, they say, 700, right? That's obviously you can throw out, but let's say they say 55 and you would ask a validity check question somewhere in the survey. And if they are taking it serious, they'll answer that validity check question correctly, but they also probably wouldn't lie and say, 55. I don't know, maybe that is true. Maybe they do have 55 partners. But if they're not taking it serious, they're going to fail that validity check, and then you can throw out their data. So that's another way to get more accurate data. All right. One more. What is the limitation for this one? This one's a little bit shorter. Just as soon as someone thinks of a limitation, use the raise hand or just shout it out.
Is a limitation possibly that they only examine college freshmen who are probably under a lot of stress to begin with?
That wasn't the limitation I'm thinking of, but yeah, potentially. Especially if they are then in their discussion talking about all college students or all emerging adults, right? College freshmen are probably not a great accurate representation of everybody. So yeah, good job. That is a limitation depending on how they frame their discussion. Think about their design. Can someone tell me what type of design did they use? Did they do an experimental, a correlational?
Wouldn't it be correlational because they are investigating the relationship between two variables?
Yeah, they didn't manipulate anything, right? They had them fill out the perceived stress scale, and then they just engaged in some task that, I don't know, memory recall or just memory, doesn't matter. But yeah, it's just a correlational study. So how would you address this? It's a limitation, right? It's correlation. You can't say that perceived stress really influences or affects memory recall. You can say it's related to, but how would you do an experimental study? I guess okay, go ahead, Meredith.
Wouldn't stress need to be manipulated in some way so there was kind of similar levels, different levels?
Yeah, right? You would just have to manipulate your IV, which is stress. So you would have, I don't know, 2 or 3 conditions, one condition where they're really stressed and another condition where they're not stressed, and you see how that influences memory. Yeah, so that's a limitation that you can, so if all your research studies are, correlational in nature, limitation you're addressing is that your study is going to be experimental. All right, so does anyone have any questions about anything we've covered with limitations and what would go in your paper? All right, so let's finish up what should be in your introduction with the overview of the current study in your final paragraph. So in your final paragraph of the introduction, what do you need to do? You need to clearly state your research question. You need to outline your basic study design, so just enough to give the context to your hypothesis. So I would highly suggest that you use the example that we have here. So, we address this question, and this question is referring to your research question that you just stated in the first and second sentence. We address this question using a between subjects experiment in which we manipulated our IV using however you manipulated it, and then measured your outcome for whatever you're measuring. So use this general format that we have right here. And then finally, you are going to explicitly state your hypothesis and the direction in which you think your result, explicitly state what do you think you're going to find. So really, this should be like a 4 to 5 sentences. It should be 4 to 5 sentences. Use this general structure. I know I mentioned before that like, oh, the meat and bones, might be different for everyone. It should be different for everyone. This one, please just use this format. It's a nice, easy format. You state your research question, outline your basic design using this, sentence that we have here. Maybe you have to make it into 2 sentences. That's perfectly okay. And then you state your hypothesis. Before I move on to assignment number 7, any questions about this final paragraph and what goes into it? All right, that gets us into assignment number 7, which is writing the introduction. So you need to write a draft of your introduction. Be sure to include all these parts. You have that opening paragraph, which draws reader in. You develop a background, which integrates research, discusses the theoretical framework, and motivates study by addressing limitations. Then you have your final paragraph where you have the overview of the current study. So there's a note here. You need to integrate at least 6 references. So that's an absolute minimum. I need to see 6 references in your introduction. However, I would say that a good or an average to above average introduction is going to have at least 8 and most likely closer to 10 references. So make sure you pool all your resources together. At a minimum, you should have, I don't think any group has less than 4, could be wrong. You should have a minimum of at least 12 research articles, maybe 10 if some people had overlapping ones. But, so you're going to have to probably do some more background research, especially take my advice into consideration whenever I mentioned looking at topics that are somewhat related to your own research. It doesn't have to be specifically looking at your IV and your specific outcome. Think about your big picture topic, racial discrimination, social media, discrimination based on attractiveness, and find research looking at that. Also with assignment number 7, you need to make sure that you have an APA style title page and an APA style reference page. Please make sure this is in correct APA format, and this is due next week. If you are, if you're not 100% confident in your APA ability and your citation abilities, use resources like Purdue OWL. If you're finding your research articles through the WVU Psych database, like the EBSCO host, it has a cite feature. You might have to change some small things. I know sometimes it capitalizes every word in the article, in the article name. You don't need that. Sometimes it doesn't italicize certain things. So make sure you go through, make sure it's formatted correctly. You're gonna lose points if it's not formatted correctly. And it is due next week. So because we have some time, we're going to go through this writing workshop at a relatively fast pace. Basically, what I want you to do is identify the error on the slide and someone to shout it out, and we can work through it. So, so I'm going to read it out loud. Someone to shout out what they think the problem is. Researchers have questioned the utility of this treatment since past work has yielded poor results. I should mention these are all like word choice problems and grammar problems.
Maybe instead of saying yielded poor results, you could say like inaccurate results.
No, that's not a problem. I see where you're coming at there, and I think inaccurate results would also work. This one's a little bit tough, so I should mention that these are tough. That these are tough. So the problem is actually the word since. So since refers to time, whereas you'd want to use words like because or given that. So, researchers have questioned the utility of this treatment because past work has yielded poor results. So these are the next couple of slides are going to be about these really nuanced results. Not nuanced results, these really nuanced writing problems. So instead of using words like since, because it refers to time, use words like because and given that. These phenomena have been widely studied by researchers. What's the problem?
It says these phenomenon. It doesn't describe it. It's kind of vague.
All right, well, yes, technically when you're writing your own paper, you would then follow it up. But the problem is with these. So phenomenon is singular, while phenomena is plural. So you would want to say something along the lines of like, these phenomena, right, if you're referring to multiple phenomena, or this phenomenon has been widely studied by researchers. So phenomena, plural, phenomenon, singular. Here's another grammar one. It's imperative that future work take these points into consideration.
They used the wrong it's.
Yeah, good job. It is. It's possessive and a contraction. Middle school stuff. Let's move on. The doses used in this study were larger than those previously reported. This one I get mixed up all the time. Keely?
It should be than, not then.
Yep, then and than. Than is used when comparing items, and then is used when referring to time, space, order, or logical conclusion. Good job. I get that one mixed up a lot. For sake of time, you know, here's some more examples. I suggest you go back and look at the PowerPoint if you have any problems with these problems. Let's just move on for the time being, for sake of time. The monetary reinforcement affected the children's performance significantly.
Should it be affected?
Good job. So this one is a problem that occurs a lot throughout writing, and I bet you I'll find it in multiple papers in this class. You still see it at even like a grad level. So yeah, you would want to say in this specific situation, the reinforcement affected the children's performance significantly with an A. Affected means to influence, while effect with an E means as a result. So, you know, if you want to say something affected, so a lot of times you're going to be saying in your own research, my independent variable did not affect or did affect my dependent variable. You want to use A. However, if you wanted to say the effect of the independent variable was this, that would be an E, right? So it's all nuanced in how you use it. I'm going to move on. Affected effects, more examples. All right, cool. Here's some other writing tips. Remember to always write in the past tense because all this prior work has already been done, right? So we write in the past tense. Be formal and consistent in your writing style. So academic writing, hopefully you've noticed throughout all the research you've been reading, is very formal and very consistent, very straight to the point. Watch out for comma splices. This happens all the time. People just put random commas in the middle of sentences. Like, actually make sure your sentences don't need that comma. It's a problem that drives Dr. Tenenholtz nuts, and I slowly start to pick up and see why it bothers her. Anyways, watch out for comma splices as well. And cite previous research using APA style. So, you know, if you look back into your 203 notes or online on how to cite an APA. 7. All right, here's some other useful resources. Look at your feedback from last semester. Look at assignment number 1, the rewritten paper. You all identified problems in that rewritten paper. And I believe, yeah, the corrected version, like the official corrected version, is also up in that folder. So, you know, take a look back at that. Look at some of the sample papers that we have posted, especially when it comes to like citations. There's no reason to have your citations wrong anymore because you have so many resources that we've given where it shows how to properly cite. So just, you know, put it in, use your own authors, like for in-text citations. There's writing workshops or APA manual, which I think everyone is technically supposed to have, but no one actually does. There's a bunch of resources online for free. Here's one that's really underutilized. So the Everly Writing Studio. So you can, they have like handouts and videos, whatever, but you can actually get one-on-one help for your research paper. And this is something that I suggest that, you know, especially if you're getting a lot of feedback from me of like, this is really confusing, or just really any negative feedback and you're not sure how to correct it, 1, come to me and I'll help you. But 2, you can get one-on-one help with like writing people. I think it's based out of the library. I'm not 100% sure. But you can get like one-on-one help if you get it once you set up an appointment where they'll walk through your entire paper and be like, well, this is a problem. This is how we can address it. So, they'll basically like edit your paper with you. I'm not going to say they'll edit it for you, but they'll edit it with you. All right, does anyone have any questions about anything we've covered today, about the intro, assignment number 7, or assignment number 6 with your Qualtrics survey? I hope to have them back to you by Sunday afternoon. I've been working through my first class and there's a lot of problems with scoring. So I'm gonna go ahead and just fix the scoring for you to make your lives easier if there are any problems. But yeah, so if anyone has any questions about anything, I'll have my office hours from 4 to 5 today. Feel free to stop by. I'll also be on here for a couple minutes after class if anyone wants to stay and ask any questions. But other than that, assignment number 7 is due next Thursday, and make sure you do the peer evaluations by midnight. All right, thank you.